This is a CBS News special report. I'm John Dickerson. Music mogul Sean Diddy Combs was just sentenced to more than 4 years in prison. The 55-year-old was convicted back in July on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. Combs had pleaded not guilty to all charges and was acquitted of 2 more serious charges, sex trafficking and racketeering, which would have led to a potential life sentence. Moments before he was sentenced, Combs apologized for his disgusting, shameful, and sick behavior. Those are his characterizations. Our Jerika Duncan is outside the courthouse. Jerika has covered this case from the beginning. Jerika, your thoughts?
This was the most important day of this case, and Combs did give a statement about 12 minutes long where he spoke directly to the court. He talked about being personally responsible and apologized for what happened with his ex-girlfriends, Cassie Ventura and Jane. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and he said moments ago, I want to personally apologize to all of the victims of domestic violence. He said, quote, I hate myself right now. I was stripped to nothing. And when it comes to that video of him beating Cassie, he said, I was sick on drugs. I was out of control. I needed help. I make no excuses. I knew better. But the judge had some very sharp words in response to Combs. He acknowledged that he is trying to do better and told him that he hopes that he continues that, but instantly went into rejecting attempts to characterize what happened as, quote, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. He said you abused your power and control you had over women you claimed you had loved. You abused them emotionally and physically. He said the evidence was massive. I was sitting right here, he said. We read it and we saw it. Images of gashes and bruises and broken doors, and I saw it in the video. It was savage. This is according to the judge. This is some of the comments that he made just moments ago in court. Alice Gaynor from WCBS is in the courtroom right now and sending out notes just to give us a sense of what Combs' demeanor is like right now. What is his family reacting to? I also want to note something that the judge mentioned in reference to Jane. She went by the pseudonym Jane, but this was also an ex-girlfriend. He said he referred to the brutal assault of Jane by saying, you kicked down 5 doors in her home, lifted her off the floor by her neck, punched her, kicked her, dragged her by her hair, slapped her so hard she fell down. Jane, quote, her credibility testified to those things, that she was a credible witness. So some sharp words, again, from the judge who just handed down that sentence, 50 months in prison. There will be time served, we believe, in consideration of that. So considering that, it might actually be 4 years. I'm just looking at a note, sentence is 50 months of incarceration. Agnifilo, which is the lead attorney for Combs, asking for more time to list facility recommendations. Also supervised release, 5 years. No reaction from Combs. He is still sitting, and there's a $500,000 fine. You can see behind me a little bit the crowd that has been gathered here pretty much all day as the family had been in and out of that courtroom. When I asked a couple of the defense attorneys how they were feeling today, they didn't have a comment. This day was very serious. They knew that going in. Not long ago in July, when it was that split verdict, they said this was a win for Combs. But the second part of that, the most important part of that, is the sentencing happening today. Again, the judge sentencing him to 50 months behind bars.
Jerika, what other activity did we have today? Did we hear there were the victim statements? Was this a part of today's activities? And also, did the judge make any characterization of the final sentence relative to those harsh words that you that you quoted him as saying? In other words, did he match the two up? Did he say, I'm delivering this very harsh characterological verdict on you, and the sentencing matches that, or did he just not make that connection?
No, he did acknowledge that the sentence that prosecutors were asking for, 11 years, was a bit of an overreach. The probation report recommended 60 months. So when you look at the probation report of 60 months, he comes up with 50 months. The prosecutors wanted 11 years behind bars. It's not quite in the middle, but it's a far cry from the 14 months that the defense was asking for. Some other things worth noting. Combs was found guilty on the 2 counts of the Mann Act. This is transportation of people across state lines for the purpose of prostitution, and that is illegal in this country. Prosecutor Christy Slavic at one point during this testimony said that this case was not just about prostitution, but violence. She emphasized the violence. And that is what we heard a little bit from the judge today when he recanted some of the testimony that we heard during the trial. Cassie Ventura, the star witness, the ex-girlfriend of Combs, who was with him for about 10 years, released a statement before this sentencing was handed down saying, "I am so scared that if he walks free, his first actions will be swift retribution towards me and others who spoke about him at this trial."
All right, Jerika Duncan, thank you so much. Criminal defense attorney Caroline Polisi is with us. Caroline, what's your reaction to this judgment?
I think this is about as good of a sentence that Sean Combs and his lawyers could have hoped for. They did ask for 14 months, which is essentially time served. But when probation came in with that assessment, which was 60 months to 72 months, clearly the judge took that into consideration. Now, he downwardly departed from that, meaning I think two things are to note here that you heard the judge say there. One is that a sentence should be sufficient but not greater than necessary to achieve the ends of justice. And so you'll often hear defense attorneys saying that. The second is that similarly situated defendants, you want no discrepancies in similarly situated defendants. When you look at all of the Mann Act guilty verdicts sort of in this jurisdiction, this is a pretty high sentence. And so I think the judge didn't want to get out of that heartland of the sentences while taking into account the violence here. That's the biggest issue here.
Well, right. So on the one hand, you're saying Joe Schmo comes in, has a Mann Act violation. You want the sentences to be the same to hold up that important judicial principle that all people are. On the other hand, the judge, as Jerika went through, went on at some length about all of this other material and all of the stuff the judge mentioned. Is that a part of the Mann Act charge, or is that...
Interesting. So it's not. So remember, it was a huge win for his defense when he was acquitted of those sex trafficking charge, which is essentially a Mann Act charge with the element of violence. And the defense actually raised a constitutional argument here in their brief saying that, look, if you consider that conduct, the violence, the coercion that was presented by the prosecution, that's actually going against what the sentencing guidelines recommend or state, that you can't consider acquitted conduct. Essentially, he was found not guilty of that conduct, so why consider it in the sentence? The judge setting some precedent here, saying, absolutely, I can consider the evidence that was produced at trial. It's not necessarily going against those acquittals. There was obviously evidence of violence here. You can take into account his character, his demeanor. This has always been a tale of two different Sean Combs. The defense wants to portray him as, you know, a lost man who has trauma issues since his father was murdered at the age of 3, with addiction issues, struggling to get by. The prosecution paints him as sort of a nefarious, devious, really serial perpetrator of violence.
So in the end here, you mentioned that the defense team will be happy with this verdict.
Oh, well, look, I mean, they wanted him to walk out. I think Agnifilo said, you know, today we want to walk out. I think they may appeal on the constitutional grounds, on the grounds that they're going to say that the judge took into account this acquitted conduct and that they should only be looking at the actual violations of the Mann Act.
So just to catch people up with that, so if it comes out in trial that you did X, Y, and Z, but you are then acquitted of the charges in which that information came out, the defense's argument will be the judge can't take that into consideration.
Exactly.
Even though it was talked about and everybody knows about it, can't do it. That would be their grounds.
Exactly, because you weren't found guilty of that offense. They haven't proven it by beyond a reasonable doubt. However, forever, sentencing judges can take into account prior bad acts if they find by a preponderance of the evidence that those were committed. And so it's kind of a gray area there. But clearly this judge did take those factors into account to some degree, but then mitigated it as well to keep it within those, to keep things a little bit more consistent in terms of, similarly situated defendants.
All right, Caroline Polisi, thank you. CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman was inside the overflow courtroom as the sentencing was read and is now outside for us. Katrina, what did you make? What's your reaction? What did you witness?
I mean, what was striking when the sentence was finally read is how still Sean Combs was. He just sat there, his hands clasped, looking down, and it was such a contrast to earlier because I would say it was such an emotional day in that courtroom. When Sean Combs' kids spoke in court today, they were all crying. His lawyer, Nicole Westmoreland, was crying. Sean Combs got up there and said his own words, and his voice was really shaking. He was very emotional as he told the judge how this had affected his life, how he felt like a changed man. And even when the judge read this sentence, he began by praising Sean Combs, by talking about the work that he's done, the barriers that he's broken, how impressive it is, even at a young age, having lost his father, all that he overcome. But he said that all of that could not wash away the record of this case, the evidence that we saw in that courtroom. He also pointed to the fact that some of this aggravating behavior, the violence, took place even after Combs already knew that he was being investigated. And after that Intercontinental video that we've seen so many times, Sean Combs posted this apology on Instagram. The judge said, saying a lot of what he said in the courtroom today, and yet even after that, he beat one of the women who testified in this trial. So the judge was just not convinced that his behavior had changed, and he said that this had to be done for deterrence. And Sean Combs just really sat there looking defeated. He told us in court today that he was broken. He looked absolutely distraught when his kids were speaking earlier. He was crying. He was wiping his face with a tissue. And you can see really how all of this has affected him. And now he is going to have to deal with this incarceration.
And in the judge's remarks, you mentioned that, Katrina, that he started off and he sort of had a trail of the way he. How long did he speak for? And was he pretty much monotone the whole way, or did the judge betray any emotion in his remarks?
No, I would say that there absolutely was. And I can't say how long because he was actually still speaking as I left the courtroom. He was praising the women who came and testified in this trial and the courage that it took for them to do that as I walked out. But you could absolutely hear emotion in his voice when he was talking about all of the things that Sean Combs has accomplished. You could tell that, he is very impressed by all that he has done, by the work that he is continuing to try to do in the prison system. But all of that just was not enough to overcome the massive amount of evidence that he said we saw in this case, the violence, the extreme nature of the behavior, the length of this behavior. It happened over a decade with multiple victims, and all of that just was not enough to supersede him saying that he now feels remorseful for this, that he is repentant. And earlier in the day, the judge also said that he just wasn't fully convinced by the narrative that Sean Combs and his team have been saying.
CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman, thank you. We want to go back to Jerika Duncan, who's outside the courthouse. Jerika, there are always in these high-profile trials people who gather around, who kind of come and pick sides. What has the reaction been in the wake of this sentencing?
I think you have people that have been out here, some that support Combs and are saying things like free Diddy, and then you have folks who are advocates and wanted to see him face some serious time. An attorney that I did speak to did make clear, though, that a lot of times in these federal cases, people don't necessarily serve the entire time. So again, Combs has already been behind bars for a little over a year. Then there's, I was told, 15% off for good behavior, sometimes 15% off the sentence. There's First Step Act credits to consider. There's a certain percentage that you can do for halfway house or home confinement and possibly additional time off for drug treatment programs. So in the end, we don't know exactly what that really looks like in terms of how much more time Combs will spend behind bars. But again, this judge trying to send a message saying that what he did was wrong and that he did believe the credibility of those women who testified. Court just adjourned, but I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts from the judge. He looks over at Combs and says, you are going to get through this. There is light at the end to help people like him. You will have a chance, he says, to show your children and the world that accountability and change is possible.
Jerika Duncan from outside the courthouse, Jerika, thank you so much. We begin tonight with the sentencing of hip-hop mogul Sean Diddy Combs in a New York courtroom today. A judge ordered Combs to spend more than 4 years in prison. Combs was convicted in July on prostitution-related charges. Today, he stood before the court for more than 10 minutes, apologizing and calling his actions shameful and sick. Prosecutors pushed for an 11-year sentence, while the defense argued for time served, since Combs had already spent more than a year in jail since his arrest. CBS legal contributor Jessica Levinson joins us now. So, Jessica, what was the judge's reasoning for the ultimate sentence that he delivered?
Well, I think the judge largely agreed with Sean Combs that this behavior was sick. And you heard the judge talk a lot about the evidence of physical violence, the evidence of mental and emotional violence. The judge talked about essentially a massive amount of evidence. And he also talked about the idea that there needed to be a deterrent effect here, that people need to be held accountable for these types of crimes. And that obviously when it comes to punishment, we're looking just at the person who actually committed the crime, but also at the message this sends to the public. So I think all of those things together, plus the federal sentencing guidelines, are what the judge looked at in this case.
Jessica, help me understand why the judge mentioned all of the behavioral aspects of Combs that have become so familiar. Why was he allowed to take those into account, given that those were things that really went to the charges about which Combs was acquitted?
Okay, so how long do we have here? Very recently, the U.S. sentencing guidelines changed, and they changed to say that when it comes to acquitted conduct in a federal court, that acquitted conduct is not relevant when a judge is looking at the length that the sentence should be. But there's a carve out there that says unless that conduct helped in part to lead to the conviction of the offenses where there was the conviction. And then one more layer here, which is I think there's a question as to whether or not these federal sentencing guidelines are really mandatory. There was a case back in 2005 that said that the guidelines are not mandatory when it comes to U.S. federal court judges, that they're instead just guides. But that particular case, arguably not on all fours, look to this to be an issue on appeal.
Sean Diddy Combs was sentenced today to more than 4 years in prison, and this was on 2 prostitution-related charges. It follows a roughly 2-month-long trial where Combs was acquitted on more serious charges of racketeering and sex trafficking. Attorney Chris Melcher joins us now. And Chris, thank you very much for talking to us about this. Is this sentence unexpected, given the more than 11 years the prosecution had asked for?
Well, it's in line, Nancy, with the charges that he was convicted of, which were transportation for purposes of prostitution involving his 2 girlfriends at the time. And the jury acquitted him of much more serious charges of trafficking for force or fraud. And the prosecutor did ask for 11 years. The probation office, though, was recommending 5 to 7. So the judge is right in line with that. And I think that the prosecutor just really overcharged the case, or at least in the jury's perspective. And then when it came to sentencing, asked for much longer than the judge thought was appropriate.
So today the judge heard from so many people, and also including from Combs himself. But does how big this case was in the public eye play a factor in what happened today?
Well, unfortunately, it does. These cases are very difficult for the court to dispose of when so many people are watching. And the judge made a point to say that there has to be accountability when somebody this rich and famous and powerful abuses his position and does really some horrific acts against many women. that he has to be held accountable for it. And his apology and statement that he would never do it again really doesn't carry the day in the judge's mind, and there has to be some punishment, which is going to be a couple more years in prison.
Chris Melcher, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate your analysis. And turning now to our other top story of the night, Sean Diddy Combs has been sentenced to more than 4 years in prison. Over the summer, the music mogul had been found guilty on prostitution-related charges. CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman was in the courtroom today in Manhattan and joins us now. Katrina, thanks for being with us here tonight. Going into today, there was the potential Combs could have even been out within weeks. So how did he react when he heard that sentence?
You know, Nancy, what was notable was how little reaction there was. He looked down at his hands. They were clasped in his lap, and he just looked defeated. The same with his family. It was very quiet in that courtroom, very solemn, and it was a drastic difference from earlier because this day stretched on for a really long time. Many people spoke in court, his attorneys, and most notably his children. That was extremely emotional. They were crying. They were talking about how much they respect their father and how hard it has been for them to not have him around, especially his children who lost their mother, Kim Porter. His lawyer, Nicole Westmoreland, also broke down crying when she talked about Sean Combs. She said that he had changed her life. And then Sean Combs himself got up and spoke in court. And he said that what's been really hard for him during this trial is having to be silent, not being able to speak on his own behalf. He said that his actions were disgusting, they were shameful, and they were sick. He said that he's not a larger-than-life person. He is a human being, and that he got lost in the excess, in the ego. His voice was shaking. He was crying today. I saw him wiping tears from his face in court. And he ultimately said that he is humbled and he's broken. He said, "I hate myself right now," before the judge and before this sentence came down.
So, Katrina, prosecutors, though, they had wanted this sentence to be 11 years. What did the judge say when they actually handed this down?
So ultimately, the judge decided to give him this sentence of 50 months incarceration, 5 years of supervised release. And this is actually lower, it's significantly lower than what the prosecution wanted. That was about 11 years. And then the probationary recommendation was 7 years. Now, Sean Combs' team, they wanted only up to 14 months. So he did end up getting significantly more than that. What the judge said, though, is he began when he delivered this sentence by very warmly talking about all that Sean Combs has accomplished, the things that we heard today, how devoted he is to his family, how he broke barriers as a black man, his entrepreneurship. But then there was this shift in tone, and he got very serious, and he ultimately said that there was just an overwhelming amount of evidence in this case. The actions that Sean Combs took against his ex-girlfriends, Cassie Ventura and a woman who went by Jane, who testified in this courtroom, the violence, the psychological and physical abuse against them. And he said that he had to give a significant sentence for the purpose of deterrence and because he believes that Sean Combs still could potentially pose a danger. He thinks that he needs more time in prison, but said that he will ultimately get his life back on the other side of this.
Katrina Kaufman, thank you for your reporting throughout this process. We appreciate it.
Music mogul Sean Diddy Combs. This is our other second breaking news story. Just been sentenced to 4 years and 2 months in prison on prostitution-related charges. As our continuing news coverage and this breaking news environment continues, I want to turn now to CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman, who is outside the courthouse in New York. Katrina, catch us up on the details and whatever reaction you are detecting outside the courthouse.
Major, it's great to join you. So yes, Sean Combs was sentenced to 50 months of incarceration and then 5 years of supervised release. What the judge told him is that he will still have a life after this. Sean Combs was really hoping to potentially even walk out of that court today. His team, Major, had actually set up a teaching engagement for him on October 6th with the hope that they were creating a plan for him when he got out of the MDC, where he has been for the last almost 13 months. And the judge's tone was very interesting because he began delivering this, Major, by praising Sean Combs by talking about all of the iconic and incredible work that he's done as an entrepreneur. He said that he took into account all of these mitigating factors, his community ties, the work he's done, his family. But despite all of that, he said that the evidence was just overwhelming in this case. The violence, especially with the two women, the victims who spoke at this trial, Major. He said that for deterrence, it was important that he give a substantial sentence here to show that exploitation and violence against women are met with real accountability.
And Katrina, just very quickly, explain the gap between what prosecutors were advocating for, what the defense was seeking in terms of a sentence, and where the judge ultimately landed.
Absolutely. So the defense was asking for up to 14 months. Sean Combs has already spent about 13 months in the Metropolitan Detention Center, so that would have had him getting out almost immediately. What the prosecution wanted was a little bit over 11 years. The probationary report had said to give him 7 years. So the judge pointed out that he did actually go less than that recommendation. He said that he felt the prosecution's estimate was just too extreme, Major, but at the same time, the defense's was just far too short a time frame.
Katrina Kaufman, outside the courthouse, with all that breaking information and context, I thank you very, very much.
Good evening. I'm John Dickerson.
I'm Maurice Dubois.
He had it all: fame, fortune, family. Today, Sean Diddy Combs stood before a federal judge here in New York, humbled. "I beg your honor for mercy," he said, as he was about to be sentenced for a prostitution-related conviction.
Combs admitted, "I have nobody to blame but myself." The judge sentenced him to just over 4 years in prison. Prosecutors had sought 11. Combs will get credit for 1 year already served. He will also have 5 years of supervised release after prison. And the judge fined him $500,000. Jerika Duncan is at the courthouse and leads us off tonight. Jerika?
Good evening. You know, Combs had plans to speak next week at a reentry program in Miami. His team was hoping for a much lighter sentence, but in the end, the judge said Combs should use this moment to show the world and his children what accountability and change is. Music mogul Sean Diddy Combs sat motionless as the judge sentenced him to 50 months behind bars and a $500,000 fine. In July, the 55-year-old was convicted of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. He was acquitted of more serious charges: racketeering conspiracy and sex trafficking involving his ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, and another woman. Today's sentencing hearing lasted all day, during which Combs told the judge, "I lost my businesses, my career, destroyed my reputation, lost my self-respect. I've been humbled and broken to my core, and I hate myself right now." An 11.5-minute video of his life was shown in court, presented by his defense team.
We wanted to raise some money for the children of New York City for health and education. We have a huge education crisis.
As the video played, Combs broke down and cried. 6 of his 7 children addressed the judge and asked for leniency. Combs' 18-year-old daughter, Delilah, pleaded with the judge for, quote, "a chance for her family to heal together, not as a headline, but as human beings who are trying to do better." But that wasn't enough to sway U.S. District Judge Arun Subramanian, who spoke directly to Combs about the abuse and said, "We read about it in text messages and emails. We saw it in the images of gashes, bruises, broken doors, and we saw the video of your savage beating of Miss Ventura." Cassie Ventura's attorney said in a statement that today's sentence recognizes the impact of the serious offenses that Combs committed.